Balban's theory of kingship and administrative apparatus of Delhi Sultanate. Ghiyas-ud-Din Balban reigned 1266-1287, was the 9th Sultan of the Mamluk dynasty of Delhi. Ghiyas-ud-Din was the wazir of the last Shamsi Sultan, Nasir-ud-Din. He reduced the power of the treacherous nobility and heightened the stature of the Sultan. Despite having only few military achievements, he was the most powerful ruler of the Sultanate between Shamsuddin Iltutmish and Alauddin Khalji. His original name was Bahauddin. He was an Ilbari Turk. When he was young, he was captured by the Mongols, taken to Ghazni, and sold to Khawaja Jamal-ud-Din of Basra, a Sufi. The latter then brought him to Delhi in 1232 AD, along with other slaves, and all of them were purchased by Iltutmish. Balban belonged to the famous band of 40 group of Turkic slaves of Iltutmish. Ghiyas made several conquests, some of them as wazir. He routed the Mewats that harassed Delhi and reconquered Bengal, all while successfully facing the Mongol threat, a struggle that cost his son and heir's life. So it came to pass that, upon his death in 1287, his grandson Kaikubad was nominated sultan, undermining the achievements of his grandfather. In spite of having only a few military achievements, Ghiyas-ud-Din made civil and military reforms that earned him the position of the strongest ruler between Shams-ud-Din Iltutmish and the later Alauddin Khalji, whose military achievements rest on the order established within the Sultanate by Ghiyas-ud-Din Balban. Theory of kingship: the stern, harsh, and violent policy adopted by Balban to suppress the internal revolts and meeting with the challenges posed by foreign invaders of Mongols is known as the policy of blood and iron. The theory of kingship propounded by Balban led to the adoption of the policy of blood and iron. Balban was convinced that the only way to face the internal and external dangers was to increase the power and prestige of the Sultan, king. Sword was the chief weapon of Balban to achieve his objectives. He used this weapon with a great vengeance against his rivals, rebels, robbers, thieves, and the invaders. By following this policy, he wanted to create terror in the minds of the people that whosoever dared to challenge the authority of the Sultan, he would not be spared. On account of this policy, he was able to remain at the helm of affairs for about 40 years, i.e., 20 years, as the Naib Prime Minister of Nasir-ud-Din Mahmud, and then, after, as the Sultan of Delhi. He executed his policy of blood and iron very successfully, and raised the prestige and power of the Sultan in the eyes of the nobles and his subjects. Main principles of the theory of kingship: divine right of kings. Balban said that the king was the representative of God on the earth, and kingship was a divine institution. He declared this to make the nobles believe that he got the crown, or the kingship, not through their mercy, but by the mercy of God. Royal descent. Balban realized that people at that time believed that it was only the prerogative of the ancient royal families to rule and exercise power. He therefore declared that he was the descendant of the legendary Turkish warrior Afrasiab, and that circumstances only had made him a slave. King as a despot. He said to his son Bughra Khan that kingship is the embodiment of despotism. He believed that it is the king's superhuman awe and status which can ensure people's obedience. Word of difference between descendants of noble lineage and commoners. Historian Zia-ud-Din Barni has gone to the extent of remarking that whenever Balban saw a man of low birth, his eyes started burning with rage and anger, and his hands reached his sword to murder him. This view seems to be on the extreme side. However, this much is believable, that because of this outlook of Balban, he dismissed all officials not born of noble families from all important posts. Recognition of tripartite relationship. Balban emphasized the relationship between God and the Sultan, Sultan and the people, and the God and the people. He considered himself the representative of God on the earth to look after the welfare of the people created by God. Accordingly, he emphasized that treasury should be used for the benefit of his subjects. Likewise, the king should be impartial in dispensing justice. Practical measures to translate the theory of kingship into operation. Decorum and grandeur of the court. Balban enforced strict discipline in the court. No one was allowed to indulge in humor or loose talk. He maintained considerable distance from the courtiers. He prescribed the court dress, adoption of several ceremonies. Balban introduced the practice of sijada, in which the people were required to kneel and touch the ground with their forehead in salutation to the king. Appointment of guards. Balban appointed fearsome and tall guards who were to stand round the king's person with naked swords in their hands. Whenever he used to go outside the palace, his bodyguards marched with him with naked swords and shouting, "Bismillah, Bismillah." Following Persian traditions, Balban was convinced that the glory of kingship was possible only by following the Persian traditions, and he very carefully followed these traditions in his personal and public life. He named his grandsons on the pattern of Persian kings. He introduced several Persian etiquettes in his court, always reserved. Balban never expressed unusual joy or sorrow in public. It is said that even when the news of the death of his eldest son, Muhammad, was conveyed to him, he remained unmoved and carried on the administrative work, though in his private apartment he wept bitterly. Strong army. These is no doubt that a strong army is needed for the sustenance of a powerful monarch. Balban, therefore, strengthened his army. Policy of blood and iron. A strong and absolute monarch is expected to follow a strict policy in dealing with his enemies. Balban accordingly adopted this policy. Protection from foreign invaders. The strength of a despotic ruler is also measured by his ability to protect his subjects from external danger. Balban, in this regard, took effective steps. Destruction of the fort. After his accession to the throne of Delhi, Balban realized that the Turkish nobles, who were led by the Gang of the 40, were the greatest stumbling block in the way of his autocracy. They had made the Sultan a puppet in their hands and distributed most of the significant fiefs and offices among themselves. This gang was formed during the reign of Iltutmish. In the beginning, all the members of the gang were the slaves of the then Sultan. He could establish his control over this gang and maintain the prestige of the empire. But after his death, a tug of war began between the members of this gang and the successors of the Sultan, in which, ultimately, the Gang of the 40 stood victorious. Balban had been a member of this gang and knew their ambitions, resources, and cunningness. He therefore decided to break the back of their power. He adopted a slow but steady policy to undermine their political status and reduce the military power of these nobles. First of all, he promoted the Turks of lower order and thus made them equal to members of the group of the 40. He sent some of the members of the 40 on risky expeditions so that they might be absorbed in the affairs of the state. Later on, in order to punish them and lessen their significance in the eyes of the public, he awarded them severe punishments for small crimes. Organization of spy system. Balban succeeded in executing his despotic policy only because he could get the prior information of the incidents which happened in different parts of the kingdom. He also knew of the ambitious schemes of the governors and administrative officers through well-organized spy system. The credit of smooth running of the government, therefore, goes to the spies who always discharged their duty honestly. Dr. Ishwari Prasad has also remarked, "A well-established system of espionage is an inevitable corollary of despotism, and Balban, with a view to making the administration of justice very efficient, appointed spies in his fiefs, whose duty was to report all acts of injustice. To make these reports accurate and honest, he greatly restricted the field of individual observation. And when the report was made, he showed no indulgence on the score of the rank or birth. Balban kept a very close watch on the activities of the spies. They were required to report the news of day-to-day events to their master. If any of them failed to discharge his duties, he was punished for disloyalty. Garrett has aptly remarked, he set on foot an army of spies by whose means he obtained the universal knowledge of events. The spies of Balban were responsible only to Balban, and they met him directly. They were paid handsome salaries, but were required to work efficiently, failing, which they were reprimanded. Dr. Ishwari Prasad remarks about the efficiency of the espionage system. The spies, no doubt, checked crime and protected innocent persons against the high-handedness of those in power. Their presence must have led to demoralization of the committee to a large extent and the suppression of even the most legitimate and harmless amenities of social life. Impact, achievements of Balban. Balban's theory of kingship, coupled with his policy of blood and iron, paid him good dividends. He enhanced the prestige of the Sultan. He crushed the powers of his opponents. He brought about peace and order. He saved the country from the invasions of the Mongols. The central administration of the Delhi Sultanate. The Sultanate period. The Sultans of Delhi ruled over India from 1206 AD to 1526 AD, a period of about 320 years. Qutbuddin Aibak was the first Sultan and Ibrahim Lodi, the last Sultan. With the defeat of Ibrahim Lodi at the hands of Babur in 1526, came the end of the Delhi Sultanate. Chief characteristics of administration of the Delhi Sultanate. The first salient feature was that it was expected to work in accordance with the Islamic jurisprudence or law. The second was that it should follow the Islamic principle of sovereignty, which declares that the Muslims all over the world have only one ruler, i.e., the Caliph or Khalifa of Baghdad. None else could be deemed as a sovereign ruler. The Sultan was considered as a representative of the Caliph. Most of the Sultans of Delhi regarded themselves as the viceroys of the Khalifa, in whose name they ruled. Again, most of them used Khalifa's name on their coins. The first ruler to abandon this practice was Ala-ud-Din. The state under the Sultan rulers was an Islamic or theocratic state. The state was a military state, and the Sultan himself was the supreme commander of his forces. It was a feudal state. The Sultan was the fountainhead of all authority. The seventh feature was that the ulemas tried to influence administration and policy. Central administration, sovereignty of the king, and his power. The Sultan enjoyed vast powers. He was the fountainhead of all power. Some of the sultans, like Balban and Ala-ud-Din, enjoyed vast powers. Ala-ud-Din used to say that his word was law. Secondly, the Sultan usually behaved like a despot. He was the head of the executive, judiciary, and military. Some rulers, like Ala-ud-Din, assumed the role of a religious head also. The Sultan maintained a great grandeur in his court. The court was considered as a symbol of power and glory of the Sultanate. The king depended mostly on the power of his army. In general, the Sultan tried to seek the advice of the ulemas in various types of administrative matters. The ministers. It is said, "The bravest of men require arms, and the wisest of kings need ministers." The sultans tried to appoint only competent ministers, who were responsible to them only. Their positions and powers were defined by law as well as by tradition. Usually there were 6 ministers: the wazir, Diwan-i-Risalt, Sadr-us-Sudur, Diwan-i-Insha, Diwan-i-Arz, Qazi-ul-Quzat. Sometimes there existed a post of a naib, which was next only to the sultan, and he was above the wazir. This post became important when there were weak sultans. The powerful sultan either abolished the post altogether or gave it to a noble simply to honor him, as was done by Ala-ud-Din Khalji. In that case, the post was just ornamental, and the naib enjoyed no special powers in administration. Revenue sources. Following were the sources of revenue. Ushur. It was a tax on land which was collected from Muslim peasants. It was 10% of the produce on the land watered by natural resources and 5% on the land which enjoyed facilities provided by irrigation works. Kharaj. It was a land tax charged from non-Muslims and ranged from 1/3 to half of the produce. Khams. It was 1/5 of the booty captured in the war. 4/5 of it went to the army which fought war. Jizya. It was a religious tax on non-Muslims. According to Islam, a zimmi, non-Muslim, had no right to live in the kingdom of a Muslim sultan. But this concession was permitted after payment of the tax called jizya. Women, children, beggars, priests, Brahmins, etc., and all those who had no source of income were exempted from this tax. Firoz Tughlaq levied this tax on Brahmins also. Zakat. This was a religious tax which was imposed only on rich Muslims, and it was 212% of their income. Trade tax. Trade tax was charged at the rate of 212% from the Muslims and 5% from the Hindus. Horse tax. There was 5% tax on the sale and purchase of horses. House tax. It was levied by Ala-ud-Din Khalji. Grazing tax. It was also levied by Ala-ud-Din Khalji. Property revenue. All property which had no heirs passed to the state. Mines tax. It was 1/5 of the produce of the mines. Buried treasure tax. It was 1/5 of the buried treasure that was found. Assessment of land and land revenue. The land was of 4 kinds. The Khalsa land. This land was directly administered by the central government. The central government appointed revenue officers for the collection of revenue, the walis or muktas. This land was in the hands of provincial governors. The provincial governors collected land revenue from this land, and after meeting the collection charges, they deposited the surplus in the central treasury, land of the feudatory Hindu chiefs. The chiefs paid fixed annual tributes to the Sultan. Inam or Waqf land. This type of land was given to the people in gift or charity, and particularly to Muslim scholars and saints. It was free of tax. Mostly the land revenue was collected in cash, but sometimes in kind also. Justice. The Sultan was the highest judicial authority. He used to hold his court twice a week and decided all types of cases. Qazi al-Qazat, chief judicial officer or the minister for justice, heard appeals from the lower courts. There was a Qazi in every town. The Qazis were appointed by the Sultan in consultation with the chief judicial officer. Usually, severe punishments were awarded. A strong army was needed by the Sultan, as his very existence depended upon it. It was needed for 4 purposes: for extending kingdom, for checking rebellions, for maintaining law and order, and for meeting the challenge of Mongol invasions. Royal Army. It was a heterogeneous body, comprising the Turks of various tribes, the Tajiks, the Persians, the Arabs, the Afghans, the Abyssinians, Indian Muslims, and Hindus. Provincial Governor's Army. The governors maintained their own armies. They brought their armies to the service of the Sultan when ordered. Feudal lords or chiefs' army. Feudal chiefs, whether directly under the Sultan or under his suzerainty, maintained armies and supplied the same when asked by the Sultan. Wartime army. Soldiers were recruited on temporary basis. Holy War Army. There were Muslim soldiers who joined the army voluntarily to fight wars against the Hindus. They booty captured during war